My name is Violetta Zane, and I am filling in tonight for John. A roadmap for a moral society is exactly that. It's a way to get from where we are to where we need to be. And for us Baha'is, there are infinite components to this roadmap. And that is why we are now on episode 41 of A Roadmap to a Moral Society, the series presented by Mr. Gilbert Hakim. One of the components of this roadmap to a moral society are the laws of Baha'u'llah. This is one of the subjects of Mr. Hakim's talk tonight. And Baha'u'llah himself tells us, know assuredly that my commandments are the lamps of my loving providence among my servants and the keys of my mercy for my creatures. And with that, I leave you in the wise and knowledgeable hands of Mr. Hakim for tonight's presentation.
Thank you very much. Okay, somebody wants to read this? Volunteers.
I'll start. Or you got it, Armin?
Yes, I got it.
All
The
right.
rich should extend assistance to the poor. They should expend their substance for the poor, but of their own free will, and not because the poor have gained this end by force.
Yeah, this is, I'm not sure if you remember, Andrew Carnegie is one of the philanthropists in the United States that really was giving away and building many things for the masses generally. But the key here is basically explanation of distribution and equality, which is a basis of socialism, is refuted in this statement.
Oh,
And if you distribute the wealth, everyone would suffer. And this is really the key, that he was saying that when the rich distribute their excess wealth with their own free will, the impact of it is enormously higher than the government or someone trying to freely distribute money. And the interesting part, we actually addressed this a few sessions before. When you distribute money without work, it creates an addiction. It creates dependency. And this has been done and experimented in 70s and 80s. And we discussed this before. It actually creates generations of dependencies, especially in the poorer areas. Whether it's white or black or colored people, it really doesn't matter. Now, if the distribution or assistance to the poor is done through benevolence and philanthropy, the person that is receiving it doesn't feel that he's entitled to it because somebody else worked for it. But when the government or institutions play the role and distribute money without any work that's supposed to be done, you create dependencies. And this, I'm not sure if you're familiar with how the markets work. You see, when you're looking at environments, for example, right now you have a market for opiates in the United States. The minute the market gets created, you have people that distribute the drug, people that produce the drug, and people that make other people addicted to use them as a dealer as well. So when you create an artificial market like giving free money to people that have multiple kids, for example. And this experiment has been done in 70s and 80s, especially in New York, and created such a dependency. Ironically, the women and colored people were victim of it. It was forced upon them. And what happens when you create a market, people rush to fill the process, the need. And this is what creates dependencies, which of course, in decades of 90s and up to now, they divorced themselves from that process and they created other dependencies. So the key here, what Abdul-Baha mentions, there are these two Farsi words, mawasat and musavat. See, musavat is equality. There are many people, including Baha'is, think that there is a great reset is coming in. This is, every time I hear this, I have a smile that that some government or entity would come and redistribute the wealth. If you redistribute the wealth, everybody becomes poor. Because you created dependency to the market that is no one is willing to work because they get their salaries anyways. So people don't really understand the equality doesn't work. So this processes that socialism or communism, it has been experimented in basically 20th century, and every time it was applied, it failed. Now you don't even see any communist country left, maybe 2 or 3, Venezuela, maybe 1, Cuba, maybe 1, North Korea. Of course, these are dictatorship as well. But overall, this process, Abdul-Baha mentions, benevolence, when people give it away from free will, the recipient appreciates that and try to mimic that process. That means that why can't I do the same? They get incentive to basically have a role model to pull themselves out of the poverty or situation they're in. So these are really the key enemies. But the key here is the word called sustenance for the poor. That means that you should have a safety net. The Mashraqul Askar, one of their jobs is to be able to basically provide sustenance to people that cannot fend for themselves, orphans and widows and disabled people. Although in the Baha'i doctrine, it's the government's job to provide work for everyone that is capable of working, not handing out money to anyone that needs it. So there is a differentiation between people that can be productive and people that cannot be productive regardless because of their situation. So the sustenance relates to those people that cannot sustain themselves. So the local houses of justice, which is LSAs and so on and so forth, one of their roles is to make sure all their adherents of their flock has minimum sustenance. Now, I remember in mid-70s in New York City, they were handing out, they had Medicare, Medicaid, they had child support, they had free housing and food stamp. When you combined all of it, they were making more than an engineer with a master's degree in computer science. And of course, the outcome was that the city went bankrupt a few years later. But the point I was trying to make is that that causes addiction. And when you create dependency, the person that is using it is the victim. And this we need to adhere to. Unfortunately, in our society, we always blame the victim. This is very interesting. You know, my heart was aching. Last week, I went to Sam's Club. I was coming out of it. There was a table. Few kids were manning it, and in front of it says, "Please, for high school addiction." They were collecting money to help high school kids get out of their addiction. Now you see how society has gone to a point where we can't even accept that we allow drugs into our schools. So you see, these are the key elements which Baha'i doctrine differs from basically secular society laws. Okay, any comments on this one? Here the key is, because the poor have gained this end by force. That means that if you start to distribute, you're going to end up with everybody being dependent. And if you look at the totalitarian regime or communistic or socialistic regimes, 80%, 90% of the population are on the payroll of the government. So they don't have free speech, they can't complain, and they get poorer and poorer and poorer.
So I have a question though.
Sorry?
I have a question. They do say that there has to be a balance, and there has to be, the Baha'i Faith teaches to eliminate the extreme, basically poverty or extreme wealth.
Correct.
How do you achieve that? I mean, if you...
Through taxation. This is progressive taxation. That's how you do it. But this doesn't mean that you can't become rich. You can become rich. But here it says the only way you can make this process of pulling poor out of poverty, for the government mandate to provide jobs for them if they can work. If they don't, you need to supply the sustenance for them. So there should be a safety net for people that cannot work, not that anyone that is requesting. Actually, in one of these Scandinavian country, I think is Sweden, they actually distribute needles and opiates to people that ask for it, because it's cheaper for them if they go and steal or become criminal. To prevent them from becoming a criminal, they distribute opiates. So you see, the key really is when the doctrine becomes a capitalistic methodology of creating least amount of harm to capital. So you do crazy thing like that. You distribute heroin and opiates because it's more efficient to do that. See, these are the key elements, which is when you go to the crux of Baha'i religion, it's an integrated model that components of it, you cannot say, I agree with 80% of it. It doesn't work this way. It's a completely cohesive model that is linked together. If you pull one piece of it out, the whole thing would collapse. So you cannot say, I am let's say, liberal Baha'i. There is no such a thing as real liberal Baha'i. Or I'm a conservative Baha'i. There is no such a thing as conservative Baha'i. Baha'i religion has one doctrine that doesn't match any political system. There is nothing like it. So if you migrate towards something else, you have to sacrifice your roadmap of becoming a Baha'i or practicing Baha'i religion, because they all violate these laws. A good simple example of it is the basically United Nations individual human rights that was passed with the help of Baha'is. NGO was first NGO in United Nations. Mrs. Motahede, I'm not sure if anybody even knows her. So she was the champion of getting this through United Nations with, of course, the primary model was, or instigator was, I think, Eleanor Roosevelt, that got this done. Out of these laws that passed and 180 countries adhere to it, right? Every country is violating them. This is something they agreed in 1948, because it doesn't match what they're trying to do. So these are really individual, I mean, free speech, free belief, free association, free religion. Which country it is that is complying with those? But they signed to it. And this is, you're talking about maybe 5% of Baha'i religion, and they're still violating it. Let alone, so you cannot associate yourself with any of these isms or these political groups, because they violate Baha'i doctrine. Enough talk. So any comments on this one?
Yeah, I find this subject very difficult to hear, very difficult to talk about, because I am in between three countries. I am originally Egyptian, Persian, but I'm American, and I lived in America for a long time in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles is basically like honey, and you're like a butterfly. And if you land in the materialism of Los Angeles and you stay too long, your feet get so deep in the honey, you can't take off anymore. And I live in Congo. I live in one of the poorest countries in the entire world. And here people, they live on $1 a day, and they have to choose if they're going to spend 10 cents taking a bus, or if they're going to save it and walk 8 miles to work. And then I'm French. My mother is French. And so I go to France, and in France, it's worse than what you said about New York. You get more money every child you have. You get an allocation logement for your apartment. You get money here, money there. And if you manage to get a job, and then you manage to have somehow fake an injury, you can get 80% of your salary ad infinitum. You know, and so I'm standing at the crux of the 3 worst examples: the capitalism of America, the socialism of France, which handicaps people. We call them une génération d'assistés. So like they are all assisted, and they're all like broken arms. They can't do anything. They don't have any initiative. And then the absolute poverty of a continent that suffered slavery, colonialism, post-colonialism. And so I read this, and it's only faith that can keep me on this roadmap. Do you understand what I mean? I've seen the worst parts.
Of course. So these are really key elements. Fortunately, you've been traveling the world and you're familiar with it. People that are born in United States, unfortunately, liberation theology that started in South America in terms of pushing socialism or religion getting mixed with politics and trying to change the lot of the poor through mixture and activism in politics, unfortunately, and blaming the rich people for the poor's lot, has seeped into basic education of even United States. If you go to universities, they're preaching this liberation theology and equalitarianism and this or that, and safe places for colored people. It's bizarre. I mean, if you listen to it and you're in Congo and somebody says that if you tell me the color of my skin, I have to protect myself. And it's such it's comical, actually. And universities are supposed to be the bastion of free speech. They're thugs and they're groups that humiliate or basically destruct people that are against socialism or basically liberation theology. So these are really key elements which we see visible, and people that don't travel to Venezuela or Cuba or Congo, we should send them there, let them become a worker for a month to get the taste of what real life is under this kind of environment that socialism produces poverty, basically. All right, very well. Let's go to the next one. Any volunteers?
Sure.
Go.
Laws and regulations must be instituted to ensure that all men can live in comfort. In other words, just as the rich man enjoyeth the comfort of his mansion, and his table is adorned with diverse fare, so too the poor man should have a nest and shelter, nor be allowed to go hungry, so that all mankind may live in comfort. The matter of the adjustment of living standards is extremely important, and until this aim is realized, happiness will be impossible to humanity.
Yeah, this is clearly, now if you look at, for example, last 4 decades in the United States, the process of capitalism, which favors capital, created an environment where the middle class is shrinking little by little. That means, of course, the consumerism in some of it is behavior of pattern of people that don't save and they spend, although it generates basically profit and income, but overall you lose ability to create capital for yourself. And this is what people don't understand. I'll give you an example. This is the first generation, actually the ones that are today in the United States, that they're gonna be less well off than their fathers. So you see, and this is really the cause of strife within society. If the distribution of the wealth is in such a way that you can create the extreme rich, and then you have extreme poverty also, which is unnecessary. Now, obviously, it's one of the strongest and wealthiest nations on earth, we have poverty here. I think there was something like about 32 million. It's about 10% of population is below poverty level. And they're usually elderly or basically orphans or single parents that don't have a job.
Or
Now,
mental illness. Mental
oh,
illness. Yeah.
Of course, that's another, it was interesting, actually. It was mid 80s that New York State, with their liberal expenditure, they ran out of money. So what they did, they opened up all the mental health hospitals and let everybody out. So they created a nightmare of housing and people that was living on the streets. So you see, when you don't have ethical process and areas where the government is responsible and follows these directions that we just read in terms of providing sustenance for everyone. Now, ironically, this pendulum of left and right, whoever grabs the power, whether it's left or right, tries to get their agenda approved, so they have to bribe the other side to get things done. So what ends up happening is that the resources are getting wasted not because it's necessary to that expenditure, is because they need to pass laws that benefits their flock. So this balance that people think these parties are helping the society to progress of whatever they're promoting doesn't yield the outcome that is necessary. If you go to anyone with any particular political affiliations, nobody wants the poor to go hungry. Nobody wants poor, but they have a different way they want to achieve it. So everybody's goal is the same. Unfortunately, in practice, it falls apart. And it's because the system itself creates segregation, create division. So here we're discussing laws and regulations. So progressive taxation is one of the laws of Baha'i religion, creating a safety net for people that cannot work is part of this process, as well as governments producing jobs for people. And this key, it's impossible to achieve, because when you have unions that are trying to protect their jobs, they would not allow government to go into that market and produce labor that could compete with them. So you see, the structure of the economic system prevents from government producing jobs. The way they do it is to give incentive to people, again, to incentive in terms of loans or capital expenditure or tax abatement. And guess what? Those people that are very rich can access those and create those, not the middle class or the poor. So you see, the economic or blueprint of a new society that Baha'i religion is promoting is different, and you cannot adapt any political system to what is this cohesive roadmap or blueprint of new society should look like. And that's really the key. So here, and his table is adorned with diverse fare, so too the poor man should have a nest and shelter. So these are really key elements. Now, when you're looking at how does governments reduce their debts, because they generate, right now we're in a spiral of expenditure. This year alone, we're gonna have $2 trillion added to our debt. So the question is, how do you think this money that is seeped through basically capital expenditure, giving money to incentive to people to create jobs, or distribute money in the form of child support or other pork barrel elements of society or political needs of people, creates these deficits, and it causes inflation. Who do you think the inflation is hitting? Is hitting the middle class. So this expenditure, whether it's left or right, everybody's happy getting free money. They don't understand that their assets, their currency is going to depreciate. The inflation is going to get worse and worse. So there is really no free lunch anywhere. So these are really key elements that we need to look at this. As far as the political system is concerned, obviously Congress with same model, and the elected individual to the Congresses should disassociate themselves with their affiliation to their party and work toward jointly with the other elected official to make betterment of the whole society. That should be the goal. But that's not happening, because when you elect somebody in your district to go to, let's say, Congress, their vote doesn't mean anything because they all vote the same way. So they do party vote, not individual vote. So each individual has very little power to sway anything. And if they don't go against, if they go against the party, obviously they're not going to get elected because they're going to fund his or her competitor next time around. So you see, the system is designed to protect the parties, not the individuals, and the goal is not to make betterment for every American. Is designed to do the most they can for their constituents to get them elected again, which is two separate goals in general. So living standard, now if you pick Los Angeles, in decades of, in 20th century, you could see the middle class was actually flourishing. Now, you can't buy a house if you're coming out of school. The prices are astronomical, and the middle class is shrinking because of the expenditure of the government and level of taxation that they do. So these are really side effects of violating the Holy Spirit, whether it's forbidden elements like alcohol or opiate in Baha'i religion. If you violate them, there are consequences. That means that currently there are close to, I believe, 30 million alcoholics in the United States. 30 million.
Is 30, what's the population of America right now?
It's
Is it,
340 million, I think.
so that's 10%?
Almost, yeah. But that's not the problem. The problem is that every alcoholic has at least 3 dependents: a husband, a wife, a couple of kids. So every night, almost 120 million people go put their heads down in pain every night. These are the consequences of violating these laws that we're discussing here.
Wow.
And that's just a small glimpse of it.
And alcoholism is particularly damaging because alcoholism is an addiction that extends itself through the generations. The effects of an alcoholic can be felt in the grandchildren. That's how dangerous it is.
Of course, it alters your genetics also. Anyways, let's not get so this really equilibrium that we were discussing relates to making sure that you don't see disparity as such. Whether you drive a Rolls Royce or you drive a Honda, it takes you from basically point A to point B. The reality is, if you have to walk, then you have a different story. And I'm sure in Africa, you face that. So these are really key elements that you have to make sure. And the country is rich enough that can afford to make sure nobody goes hungry at night or people do not live on the streets. So extremely important, this standard, that minimum sustenance should be provided for everyone that is capable of working. If they cannot, then you have to have a safety net for them. But it's the job of the government to make sure that there is work available for them. All right, next one.
I just wanted to say something about that. This is so important, that people should oh, sorry, that's the different one, isn't it? The previous one where people should be in comfort. Yes, this one. Denver, about 13 years ago, it gets very cold in Denver, and the homeless people would end up in the emergency room, and it would cost the city so much money because emergency rooms are very expensive. And the mayor at the time realized, he crunched the numbers, and he realized it would be cheaper for him to rent out apartments and house the homeless, then leave them on the streets in the winter for them to come 3, 4, 5 times in the emergency room with frozen fingers.
Of course.
And even this year in 2023, the city of Denver, the mayor is proposing $7 million to build 200 tiny homes for the homeless. He's still on that path. See, and sometimes a problem like this requires a creative solution. The problem with a lot of politicians and a lot of these social problems is that we think about them in the same way over and over and over again. But then somebody comes with a very brilliant idea, like in Finland, or in Norway, the prisoners, they can decorate their own cell. And while they're in prison, every single one of them is trained for a job that has demand in the free world. So when they're in prison, they're basically in university. And then they go out and they have a job waiting for them.
No,
sometimes,
sure.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay. Okay, now we have this one. Jeremiah, why don't you read?
All right, let's see. It is not acceptable that some should live in the height of opulence and others in the depth of poverty. A reform must be instituted and a law passed to the effect that all are adequately provided for and comfortably circumstanced. There should neither be anyone afflicted by poverty, nor anyone possessed of boundless wealth. For example, a person with limitless wealth should not be content to allow another person to live in the utmost poverty, but rather make provisions for him until he too is comfortably circumstanced. This should be brought about through legislation.
Right.
How would you even begin to approach that? Because I don't even see that being brought through legislation.
Well, the whole key is progressive taxation. And that's how you can create that environment. But
You've said that a couple of times. Maybe define what you mean by progressive taxation.
progressive taxation is the rate of taxation goes higher as your income is higher. So you can go up to, right now, Canada, if you make more than, let's say, $150,000, your tax rate, federal and state tax is over 50%. Then they have GST and PST tax, which is about 15%. Anything you buy, they have VAT tax, value added tax. So now you have basically 65% of whatever you earn goes to the government. And because they provide social health care, uniform social health care. And the problem with it is people, when it's free, they abuse it. And they think, for example, Ontario, we have a lot of clients up there, by the way. They say in matter of few years, the whole Ontario province goes bankrupt because 60% of, I think it was 2030 maybe, the 60% of their tax collected is going to go to healthcare. And you cannot even do elective surgery now. When something is free, people start to abuse it. And that's really what happens. So taxation is good, progressive taxation, but methodology of spending it should be regulated as well. Not creating war machinery or basically providing markets that shouldn't exist. Here,
So it's something that has to work entirety. Like it has to work as a holistic solution, in
of
essence,
course,
to the writings
that's right.
themselves, though. So it's not something that can actually be implemented from an academic or a civic standpoint. It's something that would have to work alongside the revelation of the writings, or is it something that could be brought about independently?
That's the whole point. Capitalism is the methodology that exists, which is amoral. It doesn't have any ethics in it. You can use it to the right way. You can abuse it and cause harm. Now, if you eliminate wars, if you countries would spend their taxes only to police their own population instead of 30% of their tax collected goes toward defense in the United States, I think it's $300 billion a year we spend on defense. So these are really expenditures that is robbing the poor. But unless you have collective security, you cannot disband the armed forces. So the model of future society, which is proposed for by religion, generates enough capital and resources to make sure that all these things that we're discussing is possible. But you cannot have capitalism, which its job is to preserve capital and looks at humans as unit of labor, and the governments are provider of security for the companies, as well as providing the labor, educate the labor for them to use. That's how capitalism works. Now, what Baha'i religion is trying to do is introduce ethics into capitalism. To create an equilibrium, to get rid of deficiencies or expenditure that is unnecessary, and target resources that are collected to where it's needed to create the old golden age of civilization. Now you see disparity between countries. By the way, what we read here is not targeted to America or rich countries. This is targeted to the entire world. That means that United States, not only it has to make sure that there are no poor in United States, they should make sure how to alleviate poverty in the world. Now, when you're looking at Africa, the policies that West applied in Africa destroyed their agriculture, destroyed their culture that was self-sustaining for generations and centuries by pouring free grains in the name of helping the poor, and created dependency for them instead of teaching them how to feed themselves. Ironically, now that our economies are not growing as rapidly as it should be, they were thinking that if they would have helped Africa to become rich enough that could buy their products that they produce, they wouldn't be in the predicament that they're in now.
Yeah, you know, Africans often say you can keep your rice and beans and keep your UNICEF and UNESCO. Just pay us what the raw materials are really worth and let us decide what they are. Don't decide in New York and London. Let us decide.
No, well, as I said, there are a lot of inequalities, but again, it's something that produced dictators, produced culture that is very difficult to get rid of, because the conflict and armed and racial and tribal warfare that is going on, which is fueled obviously with different political groups and foreigners that intervene, is causing enormous damage. But anyways, the whole point of the conversation, what we're reading here, is targeted to humanity as a whole. That means that unless everyone has the sustenance in the world and utmost poverty doesn't exist, that's when the humanity can progress. If you see this disparity of people in Bangladesh, they make 25 cents an hour, basically. And when you're looking at the process that we came to this distribution of wealth in the world, if you look at, for example, something happened in the mid 1800s. Up to mid 1800s, 94% of the population was making less than $2 a day before 1844. It was abject poverty in the entire world. Average life expectancy of newborns was about 5 years. So ratio of about 92% of the population of the world couldn't read or write. Now you come, something happened in the mid 1800s, a revolution occurred, an energy, a thought entered the world, and suddenly things started to sprout. Now, obviously, we believe that the doctrine of the Holy Spirit is the cause of this jump, this quantum jump in the prosperity of humanity, because release of these doctrine of equality of races, equality of man and woman. Look at those countries that discriminate against women. They're the poorest, the worst educated countries on earth. And why are they like that? Because they violated the Holy Spirit, the writings of the latest manifestations. Ironically, those countries that are closer to the Holy Spirit are the most progressive and most healthy communities, although they don't even believe in God. So this demonstrates that the doctrine of Baha'i religion or latest manifestation is the cause of betterment of the society and community. And this is really what is called efficient cause. It doesn't matter who uses it. People that violate it get punished with their own hand. People that comply with it flourish. Not they like it, it's because they tried other things and it failed. And they migrate toward the reality and what is more efficient. But the cohesive system, humanity is in transition and slowly is moving toward that, which we discussed early on related to individual human rights with United Nations. And obviously, both League of Nations and United Nations were predicted in Baha'i doctrine in terms of nations would get together, try to create a platform of communication of different states to reconcile their differences and set aside the wars. Unfortunately, the stage that United States is in, United Nations is in, doesn't have any teeth. So they pass resolutions, but execution of it remains to be seen. So you see this process impacts every law, whether it's equality of man and woman, common language, equality of races, elimination of poverty, elimination of disease. Unless you have resources and you're not diverting your resources to build armament or create unhealthy environment for commerce even. You know, many countries subsidize their industries and dump the excess capacity into other countries and destroy their market. And once the market is completely destroyed, they come over and raise their prices. It's a common practice. and the other countries defending themselves against it. Instead of collaborating, now what does Baha'i religion promotes? Baha'i religion promotes to produce goods and services where it's the least expensive to produce, instead of brute competition, which creates mediocre products. So concentration of production should be devised in those countries that the natural resources and the labor is the most efficient to produce those products. Now, you can do this. You cannot do it unless there is a cohesive and valid international protection for goods and services. This collaboration of nations to get to the point that they accept and they don't worry about dependencies into another country. God knows how much of resources are getting wasted to create replicate, basically, products and services, which goes to waste. Or countries and companies flourish for a while and then disappear. So these are really key elements which this doctrine, when it's applied in its entirety, gets humanity out of this quagmire that we are in right now. And you have disparity between rich and poor. So these are really key elements that is promoted. Obviously, it's going to take time, but slowly they're basically applying these laws. It's a little bit over than maybe 100 years in the bastion of Western culture that women can even vote. Now, in mid-1800s, Babis and Baha'is, women could vote, they could divorce their husband, they could inherit the wealth. So slowly these laws are seeping into the Western culture. But going against it has a price to pay, and humanity is paying those prices, whether it's homeless people that we have, or alcoholics that we have, or billions and hundreds of billions of dollars that we spend on armament or funded to create wars and suppress other countries. So you see, you have to always look at it from a international point of view, that humanity as a whole has to be to eliminate poverty. And this cannot happen unless those doctrine of individual rights, which is a small portion of the Baha'i doctrine, is implemented and adhered to by all nations.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Why is the process so slow?
Okay, excellent question. You see, what happens is this: when a new religion comes in, the old religion become culture. They're no longer religion. It's a culture and habit of people, and it creates infrastructure and institutions that benefits from that structure. Now, if you try to dismantle the structure, those people that adhere to that structure would object. And that's really what happens. There is no such a thing as, for example, Muslim religion, quote unquote, because majority of those laws it's not applicable to today.
Right.
So it created a culture that people, they say, our forefather couldn't be wrong, right? And I have vested interest, whether it's ecclesiastical system or affiliation to the government that is pushing certain religion, the whole process, people have to sacrifice.
Right.
And this culture that is solidified, when you're looking at, for example, armaments production, and you see the industrial machinery that benefits from wars. So when you look at capitalism, if their interest is to sell their goods and services, if there was no war, they wouldn't be in business. Right? So what do they do? They influence those politicians that like wars. Right? They create a market for their goods and services. Now, it's part of capitalism, but the whole issue becomes of the ethics of it. Is it ethical to produce goods and services that causes harm? So these are really key elements which is very slowly, progressively going. And by the way, as I said, child labor up to, I think, 1910, there was child labor in the United States, where obviously Baha'i religion abolished it in mid-1800s. And the reason was very simple. They figured out the Holy Spirit was right. If you eat the grain that you have to plant, you're going to go hungry the next season. So they're saying, instead of putting their kids to farm or work in factories, you need to create the next generation of innovators and educated people to create the invention. So they figured it out, finally. And then they created free education for primary schools. And these were 50 years before that. Baha'i religion sanctioned those. So slowly seeping in, not because they like it, it's because they're forced to. They have no other option but accepting it.
I think the one thing that kind of I don't understand is that in a time of such great knowledge and wisdom that the Baha'is have, that we can't use that. It seems like we haven't effectively been able to show that this religion is something that would benefit mankind in a way that people would be convinced. I think Baha'is, in my opinion, I think Baha'is are not doing the best job of presenting it in a way that people would obviously flock to the religion.
No, of course, but the key element is this. Baha'u'llah mentioned during my revelation that I did during my ministry, if Baha'is would execute and live the life of what I sanctioned for them to do, the whole world would have become Baha'i.
Right.
This is Baha'u'llah. So the key really is this: we all come from different backgrounds and different religions and different cultures. Reality is that, unfortunately, we try to become more of basic what society accepts as a successful person than become a Baha'i.
Right.
And this is really the key. And this is one of the major things that we're trying to promote, for example, dawnbreakers, to see that those early Baha'is how and what did they sacrifice
Right.
to take the message out.
Mhm.
So these are the key elements that if for example, we migrate toward the culture of the society we live in, we're going to have the same diseases that they have. Where Shoghi Effendi mentions, in the future, people would flock to examine Baha'i communities to see why they don't have the diseases that the whole community or the society has at a large. Unfortunately, we have the same rate of divorce and
That's true.
the reason is very simple, is because the culture that we live in, if you say I'm against alcohol or against abortion, obviously they think you're some sort of basically zealot. But reality is that we are timid and shy. We don't want to defend the Baha'i position. The best we do is we stay quiet. But reality is that you have to defend it. And Baha'u'llah mentions that if you walk in my path, any harm that would you attract to yourself would be the cause of your elevation of your soul. It would make you more notoriety would come to you when you do that.
Right.
So these are the key. Go ahead. Sorry.
I wanted to, I just wanted to say that, you know, we are like shrinking violets. We have no courage of convictions. When Vahid became a Babi and he returned to Neiris, he entered the mosque and he spoke in such a way that 1,000 people became Babi on the spot.
Wow.
One of the main problems, Arya, why this is not being put into practice or people don't know about it, is because we don't have self-confidence to be so invincible and proud of our beliefs, because we don't have a Baha'i culture. And unlike Christians, we don't have a personal relationship with Baha'u'llah. And when you listen to the things Abdul Baha said when he came to where you're all in America, all of you are in America, except maybe for Sharon, when he walked your country, you know, the closest he came to my country was Egypt, but he was actually in some of your cities. He told them war is coming if you don't stop spending money on armaments.
Right.
And I think, you know, that fire in the gut, you know?
Yeah.
And I think for me, I mean, I am in love with the Clearwater Baha'is. I do regular history series there. I've devoted the 9-year plan to giving talks about history because that's the only thing I know how to do, basically.
Education, you know? Exactly. Now,
and the reason why I do that the history is because Abdul Baha wrote 3 books and 2 were history books. Shoghi Effendi wrote 2 books and they were both history books. And I think that history is the way that we build our confidence in our Baha'i identity, our shared Baha'i culture. And then we can go out, because what Mr. Hakim is doing here is he is giving us his tired moments on Monday nights, you know? And this is like a university class. I haven't felt this stimulated since I was in college. And that was like 500,000 years ago. I look younger than I am. I just love this. And I wish it wasn't 2 a.m. for me. Otherwise I would come every week.
Sorry.
But no, it's so, Mr. Hakim, this is so wonderful.
No, we appreciate it. But give you an example. Do you know what Bob did when he went to Mecca? Does anyone knows that story?
No,
Pilgrimage.
actually.
Yeah, he went to the mufti of Mecca and told them the new manifestation has come. I want to know who in our flock here has the guts to do that today.
He put his hand on the Kaaba and spoke loud. There were 100,000 people present. He said, the one you've awaited for 1,000 years has come, and the holiest place of Islam.
See, that's what it seems like to me. It seems that essentially it always starts with the individual who's willing to be courageous and sacrifice. And it seems like if they try to walk that path, no matter how daunting it may seem, if they just take a leap of faith, then they can move mountains.
No, of course. You know, the Letters of Living, they went to Bob and said, look, do something about Tahere. He's going to get us all killed. Because she was professing all those, any city that she would go, try to propagate the Baha'i religion at the time.
Right.
So you see, these are people that are given up on their material attachments.
Right.
Of course, we don't need to be in that level of purity, but at least adhere to the Baha'i religions, these laws that we're discussing here. And these are really, although people can point you that you're naive or you're basically unrealistic, and these are utopic society doctrine that would never come to reality. But we know all well that how far humanity has come from mid-1800s. Interestingly, the Turks, which were Sunnis, were attacking Khorasan in northern Iran, which were Shiite, and they taking them as slaves. This is Muslim religion in mid-1800s. So you see, when this is the first religion that in the text abolished slavery of any kind. So you see these elements that came to reality is given to us. If we practice it, create those cohesive community, that there is no abject poverty in our community. We follow all the doctrines. People would get attracted to people that practice what they preach. And they're not timid to go against the majority. And this is really the key. When you talk about Baha'i religion, I haven't found a single person that would refute anything about the doctrine, because it's an efficient cause. It's the way that works effectively. The problem is that people would say that this is ideology of utopic society that people never get together. And this is really the extent of what Abdul Wahab mentioned regarding extending the love that is within the family to the community, to the society as a whole, and to the world. And that's the path. But unless Baha'is act the doctrine itself, Baha'u'llah mentions that by adhering to the Holy Spirit, materially, even Baha'is would progress. And they would be, if a Baha'i walks into a new town that no one knows him, from his behavior, they would be able to tell that this person is a Baha'i. Now, how do we create that person? That's the question. The only way we can do this is to make sure that the Baha'i education, starting from kids and young people, of what burden is on their shoulder. There is no other doctrine that can salvage humanity. Because the model, the mathematical model of new society has been created already. All we have to do is adhere to it and show that is viable solution. And this is really the key. All right, be diverting from this. Let's go to the next one.
I think we can probably get through one more slide.
Okay.
Okay. In truth, neither poverty nor wealth is of itself either praiseworthy or blameworthy, until its effects upon each individual are made apparent. How often, though, poverty becomes the cause of true wealth, and so too the reverse. And how often does wealth becomes the cause of attainment to God's good pleasure, and so too the reverse.
Yeah, this is the whole issue here. Poverty and wealth relates to the circumstances which each individual depends on the market and movement and event that is beyond control of an individual can become wealthy, and reverse of it. Because of condition, they may perish. Now you look at, for example, Sears used to be one of the biggest retailer or computer manufacturers that were basically the zenith of technology at the time, and through change in circumstances and adaptations, they couldn't survive and they disappeared. So this issue regarding poverty and wealth is not all dependent on individual effort. It has to do with the circumstances that people find themselves and take advantage of opportunities that is given to them. But you cannot blame someone because they were at the right place at the right time and they made the right decision to amass capital. Reverse of it is true. A person that becomes poor, and you see, it was interesting. You talk about Los Angeles. I saw one of the reporters that were interviewing homeless people. There were musicians in there. There were engineers. They were homeless. There was even a doctor in the middle of them. So you see that this issue regarding homelessness and poverty is an environment that you can fall from one to the other. So here it says, what is the impact on an individual when they're in poverty or they have riches? The key here is detachment. If you don't have if you are detached from material things, then you don't have to worry about whether you're poor or you're rich. So your state of mind is always happy because you're content with what you have, and you don't get attached to the material things that you can collect, because after all, we're all going to leave it behind. We're not going to take any of it with ourselves. And Abdul Baha mentioned that many times the wealth that was amassed for the sake of wealth itself falls into your enemy's hands. So it's really intriguing to see this poverty should be poverty of attachment. The richness should be richness of detachment. Then you can have a free and happy life. So here, how often does poverty become the cause of the true wealth? Because you learn that material things is not the cause of your happiness. The reverse is true, that the wealth becomes the hindrance of happiness. So these are, so what is it that allows us to attain God's good pleasure? Is our resources through philanthropy or ability to help other people. These are the key elements where it elevates your soul. It augments your attributes, innate attributes that is in every human being. Now, if you expend your resources to promote the religion, during that process, you may attract harm to yourself. Not acquiring wealth is but promoting the doctrine of Baha'i religion. Even that would elevate your soul. So these are the key elements that we need to find out to be promoting justice and equity. These are the key elements. And unless we practice this, nobody believes in whatever we say. And we need to create communities that adheres to these doctrines, and we can demonstrate. And it was interesting, actually, in Baha'i religion, in our Baha'i center, there was a group from the local government that would coming in trying to teach us how to take care of our elderly. It was very interesting. When they came in and see we do home visits and stuff, said, look, you guys are ahead of us already. So things that they're learning how to do because of necessity, we already practice because of the Baha'i religion. And this is really the key. You know, in Germany, people die in their house for months and nobody finds out that they're dead. And this is really creating a society that segregates people and disposes people because there is no need for them anymore. So the whole concept here is to create a model of society, to create a model of community that doesn't have the ills of the secular society. And unless and until we practice and apply the Baha'i doctrine to our individual life and live the life, we won't be able to create that community. Excellent. Any comments on this? Otherwise, we're going to close probably and say a closing prayer. How's that? Okay, do we have a volunteer to do the closing prayer?
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
O God, my God, I beg of thee by the ocean of thy healing, and by the splendors of the day star of thy grace, and by thy name, through which thou didst subdue thy servants, and by the pervasive power of thy most exalted word, and the potency of thy most august pen, and by thy mercy that preceded the creation of all who are in the heaven and on earth, to purge me with the waters of thy bounty from every affliction and disorder, and from all weaknesses and feebleness. Thou seest, O my Lord, thy suppliant waiting at the door of thy bounty, and him who hath set his hopes on thee, clinging to the cord of thy generosity. Deny him not, I beseech thee, the things he seeketh from the ocean of thy grace, and the day star of thy loving kindness. Powerful art thou to do what pleaseth thee. There is none other God save thee, the ever forgiving, the most generous.
Thank you very much, everyone, and hopefully we see you next Monday.
Aloha.
Allah.
Okay, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much.